As the lawyer's arrival signaled the beginning of my husband's inheritance proceedings, Jane, my daughter-in-law, stormed into the living room, oblivious to my presence. With a possessive tone, she claimed all of his assets should rightfully belong to her husband, Dan. But as she spoke, a smirk played on my lips, for I held a secret that would shatter her illusions. My name's Kelly, and I'm 62 years old. I've been a full-time homemaker, supporting my husband Tosh, who's a doctor, for quite some time. Despite rising to a director position, he always stressed the importance of perseverance and hard work. Seeing his father's dedication, Dan chose to pursue the same career path. I believe my husband found happiness and purpose in his life. Unfortunately, he passed away at the age of 68. He was deeply passionate about his work, considering it his true calling. While his sudden death may have been a result of overworking, the atmosphere at his funeral suggested a life lived without regrets. Not just his superiors and colleagues, but also his subordinates and others attended the funeral. The place was filled with people mourning for him. It wasn't just doctors and nurses present. Many patients he'd cared for in the past came to offer their condolences. I wasn't very familiar with his daily routine at work, just caught glimpses of him coming and going each day. But witnessing the overflow of affection, I felt assured he had lived a fulfilling life. Amid the solemn atmosphere of the funeral, Jane, the wife of his eldest son, appeared restless, unsettled. Her demeanor relaxed, almost as if she found solace in her father-in-law's passing. My suspicions were confirmed when I overheard her conversing with relatives. "My father-in-law was always occupied," she remarked. "I suspect he might have amassed quite a fortune, considering he rarely had leisure time." I couldn't believe what I was hearing at the funeral. Jane seemed preoccupied, contemplating her father-in-law's inheritance. She may not be aware that daughter-in-laws don't always inherit. However, her behavior during the funeral unsettled me. Dan, the elder's son, noticed and apologized to me, looking remorseful. "Mum, I'm really sorry. No matter how many times I talk to Jane, she just doesn't listen." "It's not your fault, Dan, but if you're feeling this way, could you please talk to her firmly? There are many people here." I had already noticed Jane's behavior before Dan mentioned it. Remembering her unacceptable conduct, I sighed. While I was busy preparing for my husband's funeral, Jane visited but didn't offer any help. Furthermore, she didn't express any words of comfort or sympathy. Adding to that, she kept discussing money, asking questions like, "Your husband had quite an inheritance, didn't he? How much was it? Even though you're his wife, it's his inheritance, so don't squander it, okay?" Jane's boldness left me speechless. She acted as if she had a right to my late husband's assets. Her patronizing attitude and sharp remarks always hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't understand why she held such hostility towards me, but her comments about others' wealth consistently left me feeling down. My son Dan followed in his father's footsteps and became a doctor. Although Dan earns a decent income, Jane obsesses excessively over money. She frequently called me, expressing worries about Dan's earnings and subtly suggesting financial aid. Dealing with her became increasingly challenging because of this. I used to shrug off her comments, but her current fixation on my husband's inheritance is unbearable. Dan's income fluctuates, leaving us with little financial security. We live a simple life and cannot afford extravagance. Jane's suggestion that I should walk to save money and indulge in luxuries was deeply hurtful. It was simply outrageous. It's absurd for a doctor's spouse to have a job. You're fortunate because your husband earns well and you can lead a comfortable life. Despite my repeated attempts to counsel her, her demeanor only worsened, and our discussions grew more contentious. She didn't hesitate to demean her own husband, Dan, seemingly just to undermine me. While she sees me as her mother-in-law, we're family now that she's married. I couldn't tolerate her disrespectful treatment of family members. Thanks to my husband, I've enjoyed a comfortable life. If you want the same, perhaps you should show more respect and support for your husband. If there was something about Dan worthy of respect, then maybe. Anyway, I'm heading out for a manicure and spa day. Remember about the inheritance, all right? Goodbye for now. Given her turbulent behavior, I started pondering about Dan's treatment at home. However, her egocentric actions didn't stop there. Throughout the inheritance proceedings, she persisted in her unacceptable conduct, which grew increasingly insufferable. Even after the funeral concluded, each of her visits was accompanied by the same question: "How's the inheritance coming along?" It became so routine that it felt like a standard greeting. Despite my repeated explanations that the process requires time, she either forgets or fails to comprehend, relentlessly pressuring me whenever we meet. I've reiterated numerous times that she holds no entitlement to the inheritance, yet she remains oblivious. Whether she perceives Dan's assets as rightfully hers or harbors some other ulterior motive, she appears firmly convinced of inheriting a substantial sum. By manipulating conversations with Dan, or rather steering them to her advantage, she likely aims to secure a portion of the estate. If this were solely a family matter concerning Dan, I'd refrain from meddling. Even after the funeral, whenever she comes by, she asks, "How's the inheritance?" It's like her go-to greeting. I've explained countless times that it takes time, but she either forgets or doesn't care, always pressuring me. I've made it clear she has no claim to it, but she's relentless. Whether she thinks she's entitled to Dan's money or has some other plan, she's convinced she'll get a windfall. She's been trying to manipulate Dan to secure a portion of the inheritance. Normally, I wouldn't intervene in Dan's family matters, but Jane crossed the line by trying to steal from our home. "Jane, what are you doing? That's my necklace." "Oh, lighten up. Sharing is caring. We're family, so we should be able to trust each other, right? I can't associate with someone who'd steal from me." "All right then. I'll consider it an early inheritance. That's fair, isn't it?" I'm showing patience here. No matter how many times I cautioned her against acting impulsively, she wouldn't heed my advice. The moment she took my precious necklace, a gift from my husband, I reached my limit. Since then, I've kept my door closed to her. Despite Dan's repeated apologies on behalf of Jane, he couldn't rein her in. I've given up hope on Dan or Jane changing. I didn't even get a chance to mourn the loss of the necklace from my husband before her spiteful behavior persisted. It seems she's been spreading rumors about me to her friends and others, portraying me as the unkind mother-in-law who refuses to let her in the house. The neighbors would tease with a smirk, but their concern was palpable. I'm baffled by her intense animosity towards me. It's truly headache-inducing. But what stung the most was discovering a letter in our mailbox, its already torn envelope filling me with disgust. Upon inspection, it was addressed to Dan and his spouse. Whether it's Jane's twisted form of harassment because I've barred her entry, or whatever else it may be, her credit card bill being in our mailbox is unsettling. Seeing the list of exorbitant expenses from fancy restaurants and online splurges made my blood run cold. "Dan, there's a credit card bill here for Jane. It was already opened. What's going on?" "Huh? I have no clue. It seems she's been spending recklessly. She always brags about her income to me. Is everything all right?" "Well, it's actually quite tough, Mom. I hate to ask, but could you cover it for us?" Fuming, I reached out to Dan to air my grievances. But to my astonishment, he uttered something utterly absurd, rendering me utterly speechless. I pondered over my obligation to assist them, Why would he even say such a thing? I didn't hold back in lambasting his behavior, which conveniently cherry-picked memories. I've already fulfilled my duties as a parent figure. Why should a grown adult like him burden his parents for help? Oh, but we have Dad's inheritance, right? You can't possibly use it all alone. I had hoped for his support. It's like the saying goes, a thief returning to the scene of the crime. Dan, you and Jane truly are a perfect match. I'm severing ties. Keep your distance from me. I could sense his lack of seriousness on the other end of the line. His attitude enraged me. Once I hung up, I promptly tossed the bill in the bin. The thought of Jane deliberately dropping it in our mailbox, expecting me to pay, was beyond belief. Most importantly, it's a reprehensible action that makes me doubt her character. Do you think I haven't pondered this? But is there truly a path to securing the inheritance? Tosh, what's my next move? I held my husband's photo, seeking answers unconsciously. Due to Dan and Jane's betrayal, I've lost my grip on handling my emotions. Can I simply accept the inheritance? Despite my doubts, I summoned the courage. I wish they reap what they sow someday. Where did my son falter? Their behavior appalls me, yet I navigated the inheritance affairs solo. Maybe my emotions reached through as I discovered my husband's will, harboring a secret. After perusing his will, I resolved to defend myself against them. Phew, relief washed over me. Tosh had my back. Thank you, Tosh. Suppressing tears, I held the will close, regaining composure. With a clenched fist, I vowed not to be passive. The time for a decisive strike against them would come. Perhaps fueled by a sense of relief, believing I could finally address the past grievances, I completely overlooked Jane's bill. Initially, I would have disregarded it, with no intention to settle, yet evidently she's been reminded. Her recent message struck me differently. Despite explaining the ongoing inheritance proceedings, I faced baseless accusations of sole desire for control. These words felt like a personal attack. Because you haven't sorted the inheritance yet, she asserted. I'll grant you some time, but please expedite the process. And then, as if in passing, she mentioned the bill in the mailbox. Did you happen to notice it? She inquired. Kindly settle it. Astonished, I replied, What on earth? This isn't a jest. Why do you assume entitlement to the inheritance? Exasperated, I added, Really, Dan, being the eldest, naturally deserves a share, doesn't he? Are they underestimating my knowledge? Jane dismissed Dan's claim with a smirk, stating, Being the eldest son, Dan naturally has the right to inherit. While technically true, Jane's assertion didn't account for everything. Despite her words, I hadn't yet revealed the crucial information to them. Whether I disclosed it or not, it was their responsibility to grasp the situation, although their tendency towards convenience might hinder this realization. I patiently waited for the opportune moment, observing as their composure gradually crumbled. Finally, that moment arrived. It occurred after I briefed the lawyer and finalized the plan with his assistants. Once the legal proceedings concluded, I would inform Dan. What seemed like a routine matter to me elicited an unexpected reaction from Jane, who arrived at my doorstep brimming with joy. I intentionally left the door unlocked, inviting her in without suspicion. As she entered, I struggled to contain my amusement at the sight of her. I've been waiting forever. It's just awful, isn't it? You've been dragging your feet on finishing the paperwork and won't let go of the inheritance. Oh, Jane, what brings you by? Is this guy the lawyer? I'm Jane, Dan's wife. She completely ignores me and goes straight to the lawyer sitting across from me. Normally, I'd call her out for such rude behavior, but this time I held my tongue and waited. She turns her back on me, ignores me, and heads over to the lawyer. I'm actually curious about what she'll say next. Finally, she mentions inheriting the house, $3 million, and the director's gig because Dan's the oldest son. Huh? Her greedy comment caught me off guard, and I burst out laughing, clutching my stomach. Her nerve, combined with the lawyer's shocked expression, made it even funnier, and I couldn't stop laughing. Of course, Jane, who found the situation far from amusing, shot me a cold glare. What's so funny? Are you unhappy about us getting the inheritance? No. Why 3 million? How did you arrive at that figure? Oh, come on, your husband was a doctor for years, right? He probably didn't have much time to spend his earnings. It's pretty clear there's that much money. Unless, have you already spent it? I couldn't help but chuckle at her fixation on money. What I do with my inheritance is my affair, and she has no right to object. Yet, it seems she doesn't find the notion of me inheriting amusing. Hey there, how many teams do I have to remind you, considering you don't have much time left? Don't do anything reckless. Even if we're family by marriage, it's rather bold of you to speak to me, your elder, like that. Wasn't I the one who told you that you're not entitled to inherit? With Jane flaunting the necklace she snatched from me, she shot me a fierce glare. I won't allow her to snatch anything more valuable from me. Determined not to yield to her self-centered, money-hungry ways, I tightened my fist. Jane loudly proclaimed, pointing at Dan's late arrival, "The inheritance rightfully belongs to my husband, Dan." Gathering my courage, I decided it was time to spill the beans. You see, there's no inheritance for you two to claim. Isn't that true, Dan? Huh? Why, Mum, what are you getting at? Oh, aren't you remembering? Are you forgetting something? Hold on, are you talking about that issue? It was settled a long time ago, wasn't it? Seriously, what's with the act? So disappointing. What exactly have you made right? What's sorted out here? Spare me the gibberish. Hold up, what's going on here? I was shocked by her behavior. It's like she's totally clueless or pretending to be. Even though she's the one who caused this mess, it's like she's got amnesia about it. So, I decided to lay it all out for her to grasp. Dan tied the knot with Jane a while ago, but before that, he was already hitched to another woman, raising a family. Despite having a kid, he chose to ditch them for an affair with Jane. They ended up getting married after that. The truth came to light when Dan came begging Tosh for help, unable to keep up with alimony and child support. Dan, what were you even thinking? I never expected you to sink this low. I had no other option if I wanted to be with Jane. What's your excuse? You're the one who messed up. Despite being my son, don't count on me to clean up your mess. Dan, step up and handle it. Why? You could pitch in a little. Being a doctor, you're always busy, hardly spending any money, so you must have some to spare, right? Dan's bold statement ignited my husband's fury. As Dan started justifying his struggles with newlywed life and the expenses of their wedding, my husband set aside his parental emotions, prioritizing his grandchild. All right, I'll foot the bill for you. No need for my grandchild to suffer for having a lousy father like you. Dad, don't say it so scornfully. I'm your son, after all. Exactly, that's the point. And in return, don't expect any support from me going forward. And naturally, forget about inheriting a dime from me. Dan likely assumed my husband's words were merely heated outbursts. My husband, firmly believing that those who forsake their family don't merit celebration, chose not to attend the wedding or offer any assistance. Dad, come on. In the future, you'll need us for support, won't you? We're family. Let's find some common ground. Absolutely not. Why should I bother with someone like you, especially knowing the parents' wealth? Dan had previously expressed his need for future care and requested assistance. However, my husband disregarded Dan's pleas, ensuring they were disregarded even in his will. The will explicitly stated that everything should be inherited by his wife and grandchild. With his traditional and stern demeanor, my husband meticulously crafted his will to exclude Dan and his spouse from any inheritance. This revelation came to light when my husband's lawyer presented the will during the funeral proceedings. He mentioned he'd received the will from my husband beforehand. Recalling that fiery moment stirs emotions, yet I'm deeply thankful to my husband for drafting it. So, even though Dan is your son, he doesn't have a claim to his father's wealth. When our lawyer revealed the will's details, Dan and his spouse were shocked. I spoke to Jane in a way that hit home. "Oh, Jane, did you help yourself to things from our house? Claimed it was an early inheritance. Didn't you understand the lawyer's explanation? You don't have a share, so it's only fair to give them back. They were a gift from my husband to me." I nodded towards the necklace she was wearing and repeated. She threw the necklace back at me with an irritated look, clenched teeth, and a sharp stare. Maybe aware of the lawyer's presence, avoiding any hasty replies. Seriously? I had no idea about this. I was counting on finally getting my father-in-law's inheritance. I've come all this way today, and now this bombshell. "Oh yeah? Remember when you got married and talked about how being plundered made you more attractive? So it was inevitable, right? You knew what you were getting into marrying into a family like his." I still remember how annoyed I was by her attitude back then. I used to think Dan was deceived by such a terrible woman, but now I see they're perfect for each other. I'm pretty sure I'll still get my share. "Oh, look, there's the hospital. It would be a problem if the heat wasn't here. You know, these transitions are usually handled by the son. Oh, what a pity. It's already been passed on to a competent subordinate." "What? How come? Isn't it tradition for the son to take charge? Ha 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 ha." First off, let's acknowledge that you're walking a different path here, right? It's all on you. Understand that you're breaking the mold. She desperately sought the inheritance, whether it was the hospital or the house. Eventually, she clung to the lawyer asking, "What's in it for me?" But the lawyer my husband hired wasn't forthcoming. He patiently restated the terms of the will, affirming that neither of them had any claim to the inheritance. Despite her protests, he remained composed, stating, "This is hard to believe, but it's the truth. No amount of agitation will change the outcome. Even legal action would only lead to embarrassment. If you're okay with that, proceed." Maybe she couldn't stand my indifference. With a face as red as a boiled octopus, she stormed out of the house. Watching her leave with Dan, I seized the necklace and quietly celebrated my triumph. Since then, she never reached out or visited, and the inheritance process went smoothly. I worried they might confront the ex-wife who has a grandchild, but Dan, who neglects child support, wouldn't have her contact information, so it didn't seem likely. Meanwhile, Dan and Jane, who received no inheritance, appeared to be embroiled in a major argument. She accused Dan, saying, "I married you expecting a hefty inheritance from your father, and now they're teetering on the edge of divorce. There's a saying goes, when money's gone, love departs. And it seems apt in their case. Once Dan reached out, demanding the money or the house I inherited, but I brushed it off without a second thought. I told him straight, "Quit the nonsense," and hung up. I pondered where I might have faltered in raising my son. But amidst it all, a glimmer of joy emerged. A letter arrived from Dan's ex-wife confirming the completion of the inheritance process. Alongside the update, there lay a snapshot of my adorable grandchild and words of gratitude. "Thanks for being amazing grandparents. They're thriving." The grandchild my husband worried about till his last breath is flourishing under the care of her new father, as depicted in the lovely family portrait enclosed. Despite the parental guilt, my spirits lifted, my heart warmed. With joy, I read the letter by my husband's memorial, keeping him abreast. Dan's actions often disappointed, yet sharing news of the grandchild never failed to brighten my husband's memory, leaving me content and fulfilled.